It was last year in 2018 when President Donald Trump pulled out of the anti-nuclear deal meant to curb Iran's ability to access and develop ballistic weapons that was backed by Russia, China, and the EU. It was the beginning of his administration's long track record of baiting Iran with ever stronger sanctions and punishments meant to break the economy of this Middle Eastern Shia-dominated nation. And thus, on the 22nd of April, news of the US's decision to end sanction waivers on Iranian oil exports was no shock or surprise to anyone paying attention. What this means is that the Trump administration will no longer allow any countries to be exempt from U.S. sanctions on Iran and its oil, and is zeroing in on its 8 remaining large importers, namely U.S. treaty allies Japan, South Korea, Italy, Taiwan, Greece, and Turkey, but also the 2 massive Asian nations, India and China. While this will hurt some allies like Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, any undermining of Iran is welcomed by U.S. allies Saudi Arabia and Israel in the region. But in picking and playing for regional players, the U.S., with this move, will only accelerate its own relative decline with Imperial overstretch. This video is kindly sponsored by Vikings. If you liked RTS games of yesteryear, my particular favorite was 0 Hour, you'll enjoy Vikings. It has amazing graphics, and with over 20 million online players, the game, combat, and multiplayer factions are constantly changing and evolving in the fight. Support my channel by downloading Vikings for free. Links are in the description, and get a special bonus of 200 gold coins and a protective shield, which are very handy to start, and find me there as Hato Kuro. So go on, download Vikings now. The animosity between the US and Iran goes all the way back to the 1970s, and the ultra-conservative Muslims in that country being resentful of US intervention in the nation and seemingly their control of the leader at the time, the Shah. At that time, the Shah had become very unpopular in the nation because of his mismanagement of the economy and the resulting hardships, as well as his dubious claim to the throne and his right to rule. In 1979, after a culmination of conditions and street protests that had left many dead, the Shah appointed a new prime minister and fled into exile to Egypt. And in a matter of weeks, the nation was in the hands of the popular religious figure, the Ayatollah Khomeini, who himself had returned from exile in Paris to take the reins of government and build a theocratic government based on Islam, and he declared the Islamic Republic of Iran. While initially the US was hopeful that it might have good relations with the Islamic Republic, a group of students seized the American embassy building in Tehran and took 66 people as hostages. The attack and hostage-taking was also backed by Khomeini, with then-President Jimmy Carter responding by the freezing of Iranian assets. In the end, 52 Americans were held 444 days, and with a failed rescue mission that took the lives of 8 servicemen, the U.S. broke off all ties with the country and has not restored them even to this day. And thus began the decades-long chanting of death to America on the Iranian side, and how Iran was a member of the axis of evil that needed constant punishment and bullying on the world stage by the United States. After taking the office of the presidency, Donald Trump has initiated and triggered a needed trade war with the likes of China and Germany to reestablish a more balanced trading system, and of also signaling the death of the importance of many of the post-war institutions, particularly NATO. Trump is realigning the U.S. from a Cold War zombie march to outdated institutions to a more nationalist geopolitical posture. Given the decades of hostility on both sides, this current position taken by the Trump administration only in reality helps Israel and Saudi Arabia two regional allies with ever shrinking importance within overall US global strategy as the nation becomes energy independent. But it harms not only Iran, but also the United States itself. The world is without doubt shifting from a unitary to a multipolar world. US imperial power and the ability to dictate to the rest is coming to an end. It's how the decline of empire is managed and the world that will be created on the other side of this great transformation in geopolitical reality is the real question. But by dictating to Europe, the subcontinent, and the Far East who they can and cannot have trade relations with, the US is signaling at the same time that it wants to be freed from the shackles and burdens of empire, trade relationships, military and security treaties, technology transfers, but it still expects friends and near-peer potential adversaries to heed their imperial will. In effect, it's telling more than a quarter of the world's people in China and India that they lack the sovereignty to work with, to trade with, and to strike deals with whoever they wish. And it is the United States that is the sole arbiter in the world and gets to act against the sovereignty of all. And if this is true, then sovereignty does not exist for any, only vassals and empire. Moreover, the US has granted to itself, through military and financial means, the ability to exert authority of those who can and those who cannot take part in global trade. Countries on the hook for security reasons, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, they will bend the knee. But what about Italy? It is one of the largest nations within the EU, or more specifically, China. One thing even a casual observer can tell you about China, even when they are annexing other people's territory, for example in the South China Sea, and calling it their own, when the government rallies the masses, one of the easiest ways to do so is calls for nationalism and other countries dishonoring China or attempting to curtail their own national sovereignty. When the price of oil goes up, and it will, the narrative being spun out of Beijing will be one that of American imperialism and that of China being the victim. For the Chinese, this will be all about their nation and their sovereignty being infringed upon. And what if India, Italy in conjunction with the EU or China in particular, refused this gross violation against their national sovereignty to go unchecked? While the US is currently in a good position, an untargeted, all-out trade war would see no clear winners. Americans would see their standard of living diminish over what would seem to the common man petty conflicts in the Middle East that nobody cares about. For the majority of the American people, any conflict in the Middle East is just another useless conflict far away in lands that just don't matter to most people, having no meaning nor goal, just more conflict in a region that can't help but hemorrhage misery for what appears no good reason. These conflicts seem to only ever be sought after by multinational corporations and the political class. That's why any suggestion today in Trump's America that it might respond with force to threats made today by the Iranian military that they would close the Strait of Hormuz should the US carry out its sanctions threat, well, this would be met with almost unanimous rejection by the vast majority of the American people. The reason being, the American public has lost all stomach for imperial wars or conflicts to be fought on behalf of regional allies in the Middle East. Put simply, the American people no longer have the will to back up imperial diktats made out of Washington. Americans are currently divided like no other time socially and politically since at least the Civil War, but would likely be unanimous in their condemnation for more wars of imperial overstretch. People can just look around and see the dilapidated nature of their roads, highways, and infrastructure, the growing stratification of wealth, the increase in the cost of living, and the decreases in real wages. The wars over the past 20 years have provided the average American nothing of substance and have only been ways for large multinationals and many in the revolving door between big business and government to enrich themselves with ill-gotten wealth. The current geopolitical strategy and direction of the United States is not on a trajectory or a roadmap for the renewal of empire. It's one that will only further the seething divide and not only lead to decline, but in fact accelerate it. The US is still in a position of exceptional dominance in the early 21st century. How it manages the transition to a multipolar world from empire will have repercussions, either for good or ill, that will ripple for generations to come.